Okay. Hello, everyone. Two quick points before I begin this episode. One, there's a Discord event after this episode, a Discord group discussion. And the second thing is that there's been a forecast of thunderstorms for tonight. And right now the weather was decent, so I thought I'd give the talk while I can. Really, I would say tonight's episode, thoughts that become destiny. I was thinking, what is the most important action of the human experience? We're all human beings, and therefore we all have access to the limitations of the human being. It seems that our body exists to show us our limits, and our mind experiences to show how limitless we are. What the human being is not just a composition of particles, it is an ability to move worlds inside a world. This concept of a thought I could say for most of my life I didn't even care to have a second opinion on it. I shouldn't say most of my life, till 2011ish, right? I didn't care about it. It was as if it was something so easily I had accepted. Just like how a person accepts, imagining the concept of God, and then you see these atheists online being like, yo man, it's a story. Similarly, it was as if the concept of a thought was so blindly believed. And in here, there's a huge mystery, dear listeners, because with the same amount of fiction that we consider for ideas such as God, such as soul, such as the beyond, the same amount of fictitiousness, fiction, the same kind of fiction exists when we consider that we are a self. You see, it's as if, what is the difference between imagination and memory? Memory is imagination that has been connected to reality. If I think of like a red fruit, right, it's as if the images we have connected to that, people are going to be like, okay, it's an apple, it's a tomato, But if I think of, for example, let's say a fruit that is glowing and it's blue, it's as if that belongs to imagination. Why? Because we have not found it in reality. Sometimes I do look at the world and wonder, could the analytic efforts to understand it, could the logical filterization of it be enough? And I feel that the scenario is unknown either way. That means at least the species has something in common. At least the religious person, let's say the secular person, the spiritual person, they have one thing in common. They're all accepting that they don't know and proposing views on it, on truth. And it's a very complex situation, because on some level the world has been designed to make it easier not to care for it than to care for it. Right now, it's easier for the human being to comprehend its misery than comprehend its greatness. You know, when I think about in my youth, how many people on this planet, cared to even tell me of greatness, to talk to me of greatness. The only person was really who made an impression was my grandfather, and he didn't even talk about greatness. He indirectly talked about it. And I remember him saying, "Whatever you do, wherever you are, make the greatest decision. Want to the greatest." And of course, when your grandfather tells you that and you're a young kid among your cousins listening to your grandfather, it's as if that statement is heavy. That statement is a suggestion that man can choose greatness. Even though we may not know what it means at first, when you look at the lives of a lot of great people, it's as if it didn't make sense at the beginning, but something ushered them forth into it making sense. you know. I would say one of the fascinating things about thought is how we think we're a thought and we think that thoughts think. That means this is something that the moment I caught on to it, I was like, what kind of math, what kind of charade, what kind of sham has the concept of thinking, put people in, You see, this is where there's a paradox when it comes to wondering about a thought, what a thought is. If you look at the modern human being and you're like, hey man, what are you right now? The person will eventually get to a conclusion. Okay, my opinion in this moment is a thought. Who I think I am right now is a thought. But the issue is that how can a thought think? Just take that in, whoever you are listening. How can a thought create another thought? You see, it's as if it's like the issue is as if a dimension. It's like the earth creating the earth. There's a sort of meaninglessness there. Earth was the development of the cosmic activity. And believe it or not, to even believe that you are a thought is a type of possession, in my opinion at least. Some people could be like, Mr. Within, you're being too intense. Possession, do you know? But I will tell you, wherever your attention stays at, you are possessed by that. For example, for me, I'll give you an example. My attention finds itself on a rock in the middle of nowhere. I am possessed by the circumstances of the existence, right? Now, when I say possess, this word has a religious connotation, which is a bit fucked up. And then it has, I would say, a modern connotation, which is the concept of ownership. Okay? For example, we human beings, there's so many people who go to shopping malls, grocery stores. They don't care if they possess like a carton of milk. They don't care if they, possess, AAA batteries, right? It's as if there's nothing wrong with possessing an inanimate object. It is the possession of minds where suddenly something alarming happens, right? And if you were to wonder that the human being is like this intelligence, growing, continuing on the surface of this rock, and this intelligence is possessed by all the different things that sculpt history. Like if you look at it, like the species was possessed by the ecosystem. That means before we were conscious of thought, the environment was being our imagination. Like when you look at the earliest creatures, they weren't imagining abstract worlds. They were like, okay, I'm found in a random world, right? In other words, the ecosystem was where the programming of how their minds worked took place. So what I'm trying to tell you is that our earliest ancestors, they were the voice of the environment. They were their environments. You ask the blacksmith what god the blacksmith believed in. The blacksmith was like, "You kidding me, buddy? You know, it's like it's like I worship Thor, right?" You look at a messed up warrior, it would be a warrior would, for example, may be called to Apollo, or Achilles may call to Apollo. I don't know. You know, somebody may worship Ares, whatever. There's so many different mythological archetypes of the superior self that it's like mythology was a way of getting human beings to think about how in the future they would be what they couldn't do in the past. The environment was programming us. The human species, the human being, managed to somehow bypass the programming of the environment, the possession of the environment of its will. We were no longer how the environment happened. We became how we happened to the environment. So it's like, it's pretty much a transition from what I in these talks of mine call from idol worship to idea worship, to now reaching a point where human beings are like, wait a minute, am I an idea or am I in a changing world, a dynamic event, a cosmic event of proportions that the mind can't even fathom to create misery? You know, it's as if you look at people who are suffering on this planet, who, let's say, have some sort of stress, like too much stress becomes depression, let's say. Too much defeat leads to a defeated mindset, let's say. And so the species has to wonder, in some sense, the source of its suffering is a conclusion on the world story. And if the world story can change, the conclusion of the character in it changes. I will tell you that in this lifetime of mine, I've had moments where I've encountered very rude people. There was a moment where even out of nowhere, somebody was just rude to me for no logical reason. Like, it was no reason. I didn't even know that person, but the way it happened, it felt to me, it was as if it was something about the karma of the moment more than my understanding of how the karma of the moment was happening. And I remember I got upset. I came and thought, am I a bad person? Why did this happen to me? Am I a good person? You know, I thought about that, and eventually I reached a point, I'm like, you know, I have no clue who that person was being rude to. And so when we realize that there's an inner universe, an outer universe, an inner dimension of the universe, an outer dimension of the universe, the inner realms, outer realms. When it comes to the inner realms, the programming is being done by attention, really. It's like in front of your eyes, you're a creature of attention, and behind your eyes, you are the attention of the creature. I think this is an incredible way to say it. Yeah. Now, The attention to the creature is not the creature. Ideology and thoughts are relevant to the creature. So the mystery of how the human species or the human being is beyond thought is in some sense the mystery of what is it aware that thoughts exist. The awareness to the existence of the thought is experientially beyond the existence of the thought. You know, guys, I'm happy to say, even though they forecasted thunderstorms, I don't see any clouds in the sky. They forecasted it for 10 p.m., but, you know, I guess the moon wants to hear this episode as well. It's honestly, we as human beings are trained and educated and conditioned to conceptually maneuver, to treat ourselves as a context, but we become ignorant of the context in which we're being a concept in. If a person, let's say they say somebody is egotistical, that's a person who the context to life is being defined by their inner realms. It's another way of saying it's as if we're in the middle of, we're in two dimensions at the same time, and in each of those dimensions there's a conceptual position, contextual position. In the conceptual position of the inner universe, or let me say it this way, pretty much two options, okay? Either the body is the causal concept, or is the concept, and the mind is the unknown, the known body is the concept, and the unknown mind is the context. Or we, in some sense, have the unknown being the concept and the known being the context. So it's another way of saying we're either being an unknown mind where a body is being recognized within, or we are being a body that is projecting an unknown mind. For now, I would say a biological approach, the biological perspective to the psychology of the animal is kind of bizarre. It's like we're the periodic table hallucinating itself as creaturehood that's in a civilization. I guess even for a materialist perspective, thoughts are kind of like mirages in a desert of matter, you know. But hilariously, you know, our attention is our life. You know, it's like the attention is like a bird that can fly into any branch. And when the bird stays on a single branch for too long, it forgets how to fly. It's the same with modern culture. If a person is in an inefficient environment, they forget to be efficient. Who was it? Somebody said, like, I don't know who it was, but somebody on YouTube was like, I could look at your closest 6 friends, you know, and tell you, you know, what your destiny is going to be, like, who are you going to be? And I was like, man, this guy thinks I have 6 friends. Oh man, I laughed too hard at my own joke, guys. What I'm trying to say is that the environment influences how we accept ourselves. If somebody's raised around kind people, it is easier to be kind. If somebody's raised around cruel people, it is easier to be cruel, you know. There was this psychologist, I forget the name, but somebody was explaining why there's so much bullying, for example, that happens in the world. And of course, in my childhood, the school I went to in Iran was called Tehran International School. I went there for some years, and I'll tell you, that school was just a battlefield. There was no concept of bullying. Even the youngest kids were like fighting. You know, it was as if the energy of the school, pretty much, it was a sort of kind of like, it's like as if when somebody's on a battlefield, then they don't have a question if they're a warrior or not. But there was a lot of fights, a lot of stupid fights that, I would say that I found myself involved in. There was even a fight between, the school I went to, Tehran International School. There was another school right beside it, and our school would fight with the other school. And I remember it was like the school was from grade 1 to 12, and all in one school, right? And and our school, like the 12th graders of our school, were fighting the 12th graders of like the other school, right, connected to our school, right? And I remember it was like a sort of school war. Even if you didn't care, even if it was as if the ecosystems united to fight each other, But anyways, this psychologist was like, the reason there's a lot of bullying happening is because there's domestic violence, and the parents, let's say there's an abusive parent. Imagine a parent comes home, and this parent, like their, let's say son or daughter's like, let's say their son's like, "Dad, you want to play catch?" And like the dad like just hits the son with a baseball bat, and so that child in some sense begins to learn communication through violence. You see, when somebody you care for example, does something which is uncaring, it's as if some part of the human psychology has to be like, emotionally I care, but intellectually, analytically, I don't care. And then there's a sort of struggle in the psyche. Right? What I'm trying to tell you is that violence is caused by exposure. Believe it or not, violence is like a virus. You see a bunch of people be violent, a violent thing happens to you, right? You open up to that violence. It's as if you become that level. This is why the wise man, the Buddha, would even speak of anger. He would say anger is like burning coal holding in your hand, right? So whenever somebody gets angry, it's like they're holding burning coal in their hand, and they burn their own hands, and they also, whoever they throw the anger on, right? Like probably in the future, there will be a proper etiquette of kind of dismissing anger, right? Anger is when the inner realms feel so powerless that the outer realms have to change the outer realms for the inner realms to change. It's the transference of a psychological event and its energy. Okay. Thoughts become destiny when we don't realize there's an intelligence called awareness prior to the conditional circumstances of consciousness. It's another way of saying you live as an object and you're like, why? What's the purpose? And we need the mind to answer it. Just like, who was it, Andrew Wales or Wise? Wales was Andrew W., who solved Fermat's last theorem in mathematics, this mathematician. When they asked him, did Fermat have the proof to Fermat's last theorem? And Andrew Wales explained that the only way he could solve this ancient problem, this ancient mathematical problem, was through a new branch of mathematics that had developed after Fermat's time. So similarly, it's as if when we can't find an answer to our dimension, we need a superior force to explain it. Einstein understood this as one of the most genius problem solvers when it comes to at least understanding light. Einstein says no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. It's another way of saying when we wonder about how are we being a biological body and we can't solve the problem, we need a superior state of consciousness, a new state of consciousness to be able to have the answer, right? So it's another way of saying when you reach a dead end, what could you do? You stare at the dead end until you realize there's another way you can go. It's as if the limitations of a vertical life lead to the discovery of a horizontal life. The limitations of a horizontal life lead to the discoveries of a vertical life. You know, thoughts are very deceiving. And as a speaker, I can account for this. The thing about language, guys, is that language is the skin of thought. Or as Marcus Aurelius would say, the soul is dyed by the color of its thoughts. It's another way of saying, just like imagine a person, let's say, hanging out with a group of people, and based on the psychology of those group of people, their psychology gets influenced by. It's as if Mr. Within is now telling the viewers, wonder from the beginning of the day you wake up. What thoughts visit you? What ideas arise? How does your mind move? You know, when somebody can become like a nature photographer of the wilderness of their own imagination, they become an incredibly advanced communicator. The concept of advanced communication, even now I explain it. I say that we look at the universal sector, we wonder about what is the most advanced thing happening, and we realize that for now it is the consciousness event. It's like unknown forces have animated as a common species. To me, it feels like it's a gathering of the greatest minds in the galaxy. Do you know? To me, that's what Earth feels like. Imagine an overpopulated universe, and eventually the universe is so overpopulated that the galactic beings are like, we're all going to dissolve into a field of energy and restart the system. The human mind is going into a very interesting future, and there's one concern I have. People may think I'm just talking about spirituality, but I am not. I am trying to guard the efficiency of the realm. The guardians of efficiency. Those are the designers that will save mankind. Really, how I feel is that the human condition is like a problem not being properly looked at, and in the future generations, they're going to look at the problem better and better and better. It's as if in the future, it's not that everything's going to have an answer, but we're going to be like, there's going to be so many magnificent problems. Imagine somebody saw a fish, right? And then somebody saw a whale jump, from the water, right? Like a whale, right? The same magnitude. It's as if you saw something small and you saw a small solution to it, and then you saw something big and you saw a big solution to it. I would say a phase of my life was it had just gone to the cultural domain. When you become a cultural entity, this is really the challenge of our time, and I wouldn't say I have an answer to, but I have a strategy I'm implementing. There's this sentence in George Orwell's 1984 where he says ignorance is bliss. Now, this is very important, and two literary works which are really relevant to this idea is George Orwell's 1984, which is the demonstration of the advantages and disadvantages of a dystopia, and then we have Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which is in some sense the advantages and disadvantages of a utopia. Pretty much one is seeing the imperfections of a perfect world, and the other is seeing the perfections of an imperfect world. There's geometry to everything that is knowable. Thoughts right now are us. We're living in a strange time where in order to animate as a person, we not only need to accept a thought, we have to accept a name, and we have to correlate to our name all our memories. That means on some level the mind is not experiencing itself as a human being, the mind is experiencing itself as a spherically endless awareness of moment. But the body is experiencing itself as a human being. Right? It's as if our mind is being the sky and the body is being the earth in it. Now, thoughts are like the child of the mind and body, hilariously. What a thought is that it needs to have an outline, it needs to have a shape, and it needs to have a correlation with another shape to have meaning. It's like, imagine somebody has, let's say somebody creates like this robot, this AI, okay, and they're like, okay, let's try to create human psychology robotically, right, technologically. And so the person has to be that if this robot has one memory, one event of information in it, it will not be able to compare. You see, duality is the birth of the psychology of creaturehood. If tomorrow they got rid of the sun, or if the earth stopped orbiting, imagine how bizarre would it be? If the earth stopped orbiting, human beings would have to, in some sense, we'd have to create circular treadmills around the earth. That would be bizarre, can you imagine that? Suddenly we're like, wait a minute, the earth doesn't turn, and suddenly one part of civilization, it's like it's getting burned up by the sun. What was that show? I've never seen it, but I heard this title. Sunny in Somewhere. Anyways, I don't know. I don't know the name of the show, actually. But what can I say? Thoughts are the modern masquerade. We call ourselves human beings, but how we're being is unknown. It's like end of story. We don't know what's going on. What a thought is an inner realm position. This is why we can't be thoughts, because we move. Our bodies don't just move in a physical world. Our senses of self, which the egoic structures and ideology, it's as if idea subjects move behind our eyes. We move as a subject behind our eyes. And we move as an object in front of our eyes. And we also have both these simultaneous dimensions of movement. So from the yogic angle, from the mystical angle, it's like saying when you realize that what you truly are is an unchangeable awareness that is witnessing itself unconditionally. That means it doesn't matter what condition it's in. The conditions of the mind and body, they become synchronized in an instantaneous knowing of them. I don't know why, but I feel maybe I need to look into Kabbalah right now. The word Kabbalah is like, like a notification is just coming to my mind right now. Okay, here. Let's see. You see, ultimately, all mystical traditions, they sought self-actualization, but then, in midway of seeking self-truth, they realized the self-truth is inseparable from the world truth. Like right now, I'm looking at this picture of the Kabbalah. Let me see if I could share it for the viewers. Okay, so I'll read this from Wikipedia, guys. It says Kabbalah is an esoteric method, discipline, and school of thought in Jewish mysticism. A traditional Kabbalist in Judaism is called a Mekubal. The definition of Kabbalah varies according to the traditions and aims of those following it, from its religious origin as an integral part of Judaism to its later adaptations in Western esotericism. Jewish Kabbalah is a set of esoteric teachings meant to explain the relationship between the unchanging eternal God, the mysterious Ein Sof, the infinite, and the mortal finite universe, God's creation. It forms the foundation of mystical religious interpretations of Judaism. So guys, I'm going to make a comment here about all mystical traditions. All of them, okay? None, one included. Just even any ideological tradition. I would say I'm that guy in history making such a bold statement, which I think, it's probably going to go heavily challenged by them. But I'll see. But here's my proposition, okay? For me, I am claiming that all ideas and all possibilities of meaning can translate ultimately into 4 dimensions. That means there is really 4 ways to see reality, to see meaning, okay? For me, I created my own system for this. I call it Ring of the Absent Heaven, and it's pretty much 0, 1 to infinity. All conceptual possibility is left to this. Okay, that means all traditions were attempting to fulfill this, I think. So let me explain what I mean. You see here, for example, in the Kabbalistic tradition, okay, it says the relationship between the unchanging, eternal God, the infinite, the mortal, finite universe. Okay, what does this mean? This means the relationship of humanity with the singular, that's the eternal God, with the mystery, that is in some sense you can say the infinite. Infinity is a sort of, it reaches a mystery. The finite universe is our dualism, the duality. Do you see? And there's also one thing they should say here, also with emptiness. You see, it's as if this bizarre notion, even if you're a religious person, you're like, it's as if God was so mighty that God created nothing. That means created nothing. You see what I'm saying? Nothing is created. So I'm pretty much saying reality is either going to the 0 dimension, it doesn't mean anything. It's either going to the singular dimension, it all has meaning. Either it's remaining in the dualistic dimension, its meaning comes and goes. And then there is the infinite, where its meaning doesn't have an edge. Its meaning never finishes. And beyond the infinite, right now we don't have the psychology of infinite beings on the planet. What I mean by this is like the psychology of an infinite being, or at least from, let's say, the school of thought of Buckminster Fuller. He would call it the universe man, but he wouldn't say it like that. He would say the universe man, as in the universal man. The universal human being, in other words. Here it says, I'm going to read more a bit about Kabbalism. Honestly, I probably should research this more and then talk about it. But anyways, I'm just reading here, I guess. When read by later generations of Kabbalists, the Torah's description of the creation in the book of Genesis reveals mysteries about God himself, the true nature of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, as well as the interaction of these supernatural entities with the serpent, which leads to disaster when they eat the forbidden fruit, as recorded in Genesis 3. Guys, I'm not gonna lie, for a second I thought Genesis 3 was like an anime. But honestly, ancient books are like they're like alien spacecraft debris. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they're rare technology. To me, everything is really the most. If I want to interact with anything, it's a technology. The human body is a technology. The human mind, the systems of language, the governance of memory based on how it has occurred so far. Like, these are all the immense in nature are numerous. Here it says the Bible provides ample additional material for mythic and mystical speculation. The prophet Ezekiel's visions in particular attracted much mystical speculation, as did Isaiah's temple vision. Other mystical events include Jacob's vision of the ladder to heaven and Moses' encounters with the burning bush and God on Mount Sinai. The 72-letter name of God, which is used in Jewish mysticism for meditation purposes, is derived from the Hebrew verbal utterance. Moses spoke in the presence of an angel while the sea of reeds parted, allowing the Hebrews to escape their approaching attackers. The miracle of the Exodus, which led to Moses receiving the Ten Commandments and the Jewish Orthodox view of the acceptance of the Torah at Mount Sinai, preceded the creation of the first Jewish nation approximately 300 years before King Saul. You see, guys, mysticism is another way of saying that if the world was alive, how would living beings in a living world behave? There is, I know, like, esotericism is like that you open the hood of a car and then you see its engine is vertically, endlessly going down. Like, it has the biggest engine, right? Esotericism to me is honestly like trying to find the mechanism of a divinity that surpasses the dimensions where you're wondering about. It's an art form at best. I think true esotericism in the future is just going to be very kind and wise beings just talking about the various ways that life can be perceived and how the species no longer needs to be possessed by ideology. Right? Behavior is inspired by ideology, And you know what we find in the human being? This was something where there was a group of scientists talking and they're like, we don't get it. What, it's like we're living in the 21st century, like we're living at a time where there's science, various systems of explanation. Why are still people going towards like religion? Why is the number of religion increasing? Right? The number of religious people. And you know why? Because the idea is that the human being gets bored with its containment. You see, it's as if people need a way to interact with infinity, or then they feel life is not, you know what it is? It's the speed of life. Right? When an unknown truth comes into the background of the moment, the speed of life increases. Like it becomes easier to wanna, explore beyond all that you've seen to see what else is there. When you realize there's something mysterious, unknown going on in the world event. But if that's not there, then you, in some sense, you hesitate in the comfort of how your thoughts have become. It's like you're in it. It's like living in a thought rather than realizing thoughts are like forces that serve a purpose in the moment, and after their purpose is complete, you move on. Thoughts are, we're an antenna, right? And throughout the day, think about it. Let's say a person is a gardener. Okay, and let's say for 12 hours a day they're just watering plants. Now this person, in those 12 hours, they are actually, imagine how many different thoughts come and go as the person's watering the plants. Do you know what I'm saying? What I'm trying to say is that so many thought forms come and go in our minds. So many versions of how the moment can animate probabilities of reality come and go in our mind, and we don't act upon them. Do you know? To be honest, wisdom is just knowing what thoughts to act upon, because many thoughts come and go. The inner realms is an unconditional information server. The outer realms is a conditional information server. You see, human beings are scattered all around the world to, I think, become hunter-gatherers of the human species, both in the inner realms and the outer realms. We're living at a time where our life shouldn't just mean what happened to our body. It should mean also what our mind, how our mind performed, what we created, what sort of sound we created in you can say the orchestra of civilization. You know, a very beautiful image I can give the listeners about what an advanced civilization's emergence would be like. It would be like suddenly seeing an inefficient world and everybody in that inefficient world, or every member of that inefficient civilization just stopping, and then in some sense reactivating and walking towards the advanced civilization. It would literally be, it's as if like when the advanced civilization, its true engines start going, like it would literally be like, it's as if you are seeing the silent pull of a species to its own greatness. You know, it's very phenomenal. When a person asks, let's say person A and person B asks person A, who are you? And the honest answer is actually person A should say, in some sense, no one will ever know. That's the part of the responsibility that comes with holding a mind which has its own private sector, it has its own private universe. I'll be honest, I could give 10,000 talks, and probably at the end of it, people will still not know what Really, it's like, what do we do with what we see behind our eyes, and what do we do with what we see in front of us? The subtitle of this episode: what is the most important action of the human experience? That means, imagine this is the question. Imagine every human being that has ever lived and every human being that will live. Imagine somehow they could hear this question: what is the most important action of the human experience? It's another way of saying, what is the purpose of humanity, and should the species realize it should never fear that question? That question leads to the birthright of the universe. For the future generations, biology requires to be kept as important. It's as if biological freedom led to experiential advancement. There's going to be so many different kinds of human beings on this planet that I think their realization of what's the best thing that a human being can do is in some sense to discover their true nature. to find their original state. You see, there is a one can have this view that life was imperfect from the beginning, or one can have this view that life was perfect from the beginning, and then the imperfections entered the conscious domain or vicinity. There may come a time where, this question that we human beings are asking, or like, what is the purpose of life? Maybe it's a question that in the future, let's say androids that have become conscious would ask. Let's say all the animals in nature somehow connected to AI, they could ask, right? It's as if the human being has reached a state of how life on earth in this universe is being, that it's like other beings are going to reach this state eventually. It's like a pet owner, let's say a dog owner or a cat owner, looking at their pets and being like, no way, you guys are gonna, incarnate as human beings in like 5 lifetimes. I think it's true that what we love ends up becoming us. I guess I'll say this. That thoughts become our destiny. If we choose to see nothing else. Imagine the person feels bad and then, they have to be like, how do I know I'm bad? And then they feel good and they're like, how do I know I'm good? And eventually it just comes to the unknown dynamism of a changing world and the contentment with it. I think actually true human life doesn't begin unless we become content with the unknown. Unless we stop fearing or allowing fear to conceive, to be a conception. Who was it? I think it was this man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Somebody told him something's impossible, and he's like, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. Like he's saying, buddy, it's impossible because they haven't found a way to see it as possible. Everything is like this, Right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm just wondering about the next 10, 20, 30 years, and I wonder, it's like, okay, how is the world going to move? How is it going to happen? Poetically, the world is like a giant, and we're all on its shoulder, and regardless of how much ego you have, or we're blamed for having an ego, it doesn't matter, we're still on the shoulder of giants, I honestly feel a universal perspective purifies the ignorance of, localized, of an ethnocentric mode. answer to what is the most important human action of human experience, I would say would be to love the future as if it could never die. Love the immortal destiny of the species. Do not fear the continuity of efforts. You know, it's as if I ask myself, why did the past, like what were my ancestors learning from? And some part of me can't ignore that they were living from me to get here. You know, it's like a person looks at all his ancestors, looks at all the human beings that were alive before they were born, and then they, in some sense, look at that human species and say, like, okay, rest in gentleness now, you know, it's like modernity has arrived. You know, we have to unleash, like literally, I want the species to go Super Saiyan, you know. You know, it's like get to ultra instinct and we're fine, you know. And the universe is gonna say that. I wanted to read something for the listeners. And guys, one point I forgot to mention about the concept of Kabbalah is that I think the picture of it needs to be seen three-dimensionally, as if it's starting from you know, it's like a three-dimensional picture, not a 2D chart symbol. Okay, so what I'm going to read for you is called The 5 Brainwaves and its Connection with Flow State. There's a quote from Jose Silva: the greatest discovery you'll ever make is the potential of your own mind. So what are the 5 brainwaves? Brainwaves are produced by synchronized electrical pulses from masses of neurons communicating with each other. Our brainwaves change according to what we're doing and feeling. So there's one brainwave called gamma brainwaves involved in higher processing tasks as well as cognitive functioning. Then there's the beta state, associated with normal waking consciousness and a heightened state of alertness. Then there is the alpha state, dominant during quietly flowing thoughts, daydream, or during light meditation. So the alpha state is a flow state. Then it says the theta state is the 4th type of brainwave. In a dream, it's the one where you have in a dream vivid imagery, intuition, and information beyond normal consciousness awareness. And then there is the 5th type of brainwave called a delta brainwave, experience in a deep dreamless sleep and in very deep transcendental meditation. Yeah, it's samadhi. So the delta state is pretty much deep sleep. But for samadhi, it would be a deep awakening. You know? Like that's a poetic way of saying. Then it says, so what does brainwaves do with flow state? So if this flow state is between alpha and theta, I would say it increases alpha brainwaves precede peak performance. And the theta state in an intense creativity, you're having a mystical theta burst. Okay, I don't know what mystical theta burst, like what that means, but I would say this is the proper antenna range. So when I tell people you're an antenna, it's as if between the alpha brainwaves and theta brainwaves, like this is being suggested. Now, I don't know, like, this is just an approach. Really what it is that the brain is dancing. And when we allow it to dance, we allow ourselves to understand our own mind, and you will feel like a child that has entered a new world. That's how you get to know your mind, dear listeners. This is the teachings of how imagination activates. It activates with vision. It activates with how truly you're looking at the world. Is it important for you, the unknown, or is it in some sense something to ignore, and so the illusions of knowledge limit their own pursuits? There is a strange romance, guys. I don't know. I would say I never thought such a romance could exist, but it's a romance with what our future deserves. The idea is to, just like how from the agricultural phase, or even starting from the nomadic phase, we've come to the urbanization phase, and urbanization has been the expansion of the standards of living, the quality of the standards of living of the people. The first idea is to get the species in an enough physiological surviving state where now it can begin its psychological work, the great work of minds ruling, like, 10,000 lions, that are looking at 10,000 suns. It's like the wolf howls at the moon and the lion roars at the sun. and I guess one last comment before I end this off. But I wanted to talk about this picture that I chose. And I wanted to say that I don't know what to make of this, but I feel I have glimpsed into the future of modern culture. And there, just like there's the concept of an ancient mysticism, demigods, I think in the future there's going to be the concept of demi-humans. It's fascinating. It's so fascinating, the geometry of this realm. It's like an endless, all-you-can-eat buffet of perception. Like, I'm not kidding, guys. We are literally in a geometrical gold mine. If you treat yourself like a designer, you will be fascinated how everything has design. If we want to talk about it, it has to have a design. Those people who are, let's say, good speakers, they know their design before they speak about it. That means they have somewhere to go in their mind. The eye of being. Reality is the demi-human phase is going to be strange. Pretty much, I don't know why my mind, received this sort of image from my inner realms, but pretty much I thought I saw a scene, like an event, that in the future, imagine people go to a nightclub, they go to the nightclub and they see the bouncer, right? But then, or let me say it this way, imagine you go to a nightclub, you go to get a drink at the bar, right? And it's like a packed nightclub, and then you see beside you there's someone, and they have the head of Anubis from Egyptian mythology. They have the head of like that animal. Do you know? Imagine somebody has the head of a pigeon, which I should say head of a pigeon. That's hilarious. Like pigeon people, and they're passing the crosswalk. Like, no. I mean, like for example, the concept of Hermes, right? Hermes, if you look at it in Egyptian mythology, he's like he has the head of a bird. What I'm trying to say is that would be the demi-human phase. That would be the phase when the human beings have surpassed the limits of their biology. It's as if we have stepped beyond the comfort zone of biological human existence and what it means to be a natural human being, and then there's going to be divergence pathways, right? That means, believe it or not, in the future, people can be any animal on the planet. Can you imagine, all the girls in Japan suddenly have, cat ears, instead of tattoos, people get a tail, can you imagine that culture? Imagine in the future, the greatest fashion is going to be the depiction of mythology. It's hilarious. Back in the day, they had giant statues of gods, and now we have, fashion of people. Honestly, if I was if somebody was in a trillionaire's position, they should be creating epic statues, giant statues. And it would be as if any person would, in some sense, you'd be honored. I think the major point in the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, that it was a human being guarding the galaxy. Sometimes I think of the concept of even the time traveler, and I think it's a backup system, to the past. It's as if, if the past messes up, the future assists it. The future is the teacher, is the true teacher. That means after you have learned from all the physical teachers of the realm, you begin to experience teachings of the world, The poet Rumi says, from 700 years ago, this Persian poet, he says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a place. I will meet you there. He says this to pretty much the future generations. And later on, it took me a while to fully realize that place is the future. The future will be beyond duality. The fears that exist today will not even conceptually exist for the future generations. They will have mindsets so superior that we will just, bask in the honor of how we got them there. It is time for the species to advance beyond time, to march towards the timeless, to not be afraid to experience a mortal life and an immortal life, and to experience an eternal mind and a temporary mind. an infinite mind, excuse me, I'll say it this way, an immortal life and a mortal life, an infinite mind and a finite mind, and in some sense an unknown soul and a known soul. And to be honest, the human species is going to realize all those people in history who preached compassion and benevolence, these guys were ahead of their time. Any ideological system who just shouted at the world realized that a collective being, in some sense, without caring for itself, cannot advance, right? It's as if the human species is a giant, and we all make up the giant, and all our mindsets affect the health of the giant. You know, that means people right now, there's competition, but there's efficient competition and inefficient competition. Inefficient competition has losers. Efficient competition doesn't have a concept of victory. It has a concept of collective progress and individual progress activation. So that means it's like this thing that a great being has no more desires left. Imagine whoever you are listening to me, whatever you are listening to me. A great being has no desires because it has attained the greatest desire. You see, greatness is the finale. It's like we build the most, not build, but we become the most advanced type of intelligence in the realm, and then we accept. If you were the greatest being, you would have no desires, and in some sense you would educate infinity. There's a person in our history known as Rishi Vyasa. And I don't know what to tell you guys, but this guy, this person, a part of me understands him from his eyes, This guy wrote 18 books on leaves and intuitively guided, and at the end he was not satisfied. Something was missing from the divinity of the moment. And suddenly an angel comes to Rishi Vyasa and says, if you do not write about your love of truth, your devotion to truth, your love for truth, you will not feel content. And Rishi Vyasa understands that it is now time to not release the brain's performance, but the heart's performance. And the heart's performance is, we believe it or not, it's how for the first time the human psychology sacrifices, just puts its own inner realm on pause and looks at the outer realms. And it's so important to do this fearlessly, because if there is fear, you stop yourself from seeing what's happening. In the future, there will be the honor of the advanced civilization, uniting all kinds of beings, whether there's demi-humans, whether there's demigods, whether there's extraterrestrials, androids, whatever. It's as if the species is so advanced it can assist the whole universal cycle. It's as if Earth becomes, not just an incredibly advancing planet in the galaxy, but it also becomes the most incredible airport and library. Like this, we don't realize it, but I think I envision this in the future that I'm getting into the sci-fi stuff I've written, but pretty much the future will learn from infinity and eternity to know itself as that, and once it does, you are complete. You become a completed being, and your body and mind are just here to assist, before their time comes. So what I'm trying to say is that when the human being discovers the true nature of its being, that being is complete by the nature of its origin. Because it's complete, it's as if a causal being can never die. It's as if like energy cannot be created or destroyed. And the deepest psychological truth is this realization, which suddenly it gives the idea of the Atman, the soul meaning. Many religious systems, like monotheists may think they have something, they're different than polytheists, but I am telling you, hilariously, everybody believes that there is something moving behind their eyes. That's the soul. And the relationship of that beyond the mind and body, it's as if, imagine this metaphor that your body was the soldiers, the mind was the commander, and in some sense your soul was a general. And so after the soldiers have become victorious, they have completed their journey. It's as if after the commanders, and soldiers and the journey, it's as if after the dimensions of the body have been completed, and after the dimensions of the mind is completed, then you become this selfless being, and novelty starts becoming your presence. So what I'm trying to say is that after the commanders, it's like the moment when the soldiers have done their part, the commander has done their part, then finally the general does his part, which is the release of the soldiers and the commanders. It's as if, imagine there was a human being who, before they passed away, just silently to themselves, they just said that, dear body, you have served me well. Your service will not be forgotten. May all cells be blessed. All cells that constituted me in this lifetime be blessed in the return. And imagine then, it's as if before the general releases the mind. So the body is honored, and the body, continues on, returns to its periodic table, But the mind, it's as if the discussion of the commander with the general, and what the mind looks for is for the soul to accept it. So the mind is like a commander on the battlefield. It has given the commands. It has tried to live for the kingdom of the consciousness. And at the end, the mind just looks at the general as if like wondering if the general is proud. And this is where the general hugs the mind. It's another way of saying where you love how simply you existed and just were a human being in this system. When you love your mind, you release it from its own suffering. Just like you imagine a young child is about to put something dangerous in its mouth, and the parent just runs to correct it and then hugs the child. Similarly, it's like the same relationship with the mind, is that the soul honors the mind, gives a medal to the mind, and then the mind in some sense releases itself from its position through the permission of the soul. And finally, the general is left looking at a kingdom that is no longer at war. And what the general does is goes to serve the king, the emperor. And the emperor is a unified being. That means it's as if right now I'm a field of activity I am some pilot that has moved through a collective field to be here now, to have a voice, to even speak. When the soul honors the mind fulfills its destiny. And the destiny of a being in time is either timeless or it never was there in the room. You see, that's the bizarreness of non-existence. It's as if like you could do whatever in existence, be cruel, kind, whatever, but at the end we're all like existentially not going to be here. And so what that implies is that it's like, was it all for nothing, or is it nothing where all is going to? It's like, could nothing be a veil? Could nothing, non-existence, be the surface of an ocean we have not cared to look at its hidden depths? The mysteries of the mind are plenty. The mysteries of the body are less, but they're still plenty. And the mysteries of the soul are, what is the species going to do when it realizes intelligence can function non-dualistically? It's a completely reset of, cultural behavior and just the structure, the layout of, the human effort. And ultimately, what can you do? Love the world that you're in once, and love the world that you're being before time existed. It's like peace is in the room before we were in pieces. And so, in the future, I would say what Mr.Within expects from the members of an advanced civilization is, aside from pure benevolence and honor and compassion to allow such great freedom in the environment that the greatest ideas from the inner realms, it's as if we release armies of genius on the planet by making the world just a way more efficient, compassionate, interesting place. Do you see? It's like the energy that goes to violence, it can all be moved into cyberspace. And imagine that there was so much metal, like, right now, to me it's hilarious. Right now, if you look at the sky, right, I think in the stratosphere, I don't know where, just at some point in our atmosphere, there's so much, like, kind of dead satellites, just like dead debris just moving in our orbit. Now imagine the human species could use this debris to build sky cities. That is civilization 2.0, guys. Hopefully when my book comes out, I guess I'll, fearlessly attempt to speak in public. Guys, I don't know, so, I give these talks and sometimes I think if I spoke in front of a lot of people, they're just gonna be like, this guy's behind his eyes more than he's in front of him. But what can we do? Life seems to be the only truth we have to experience. The advanced civilizations would be magnificent. They would be so superior behind their eyes that in some sense the concept of inferior and superior goes away. A species found the kindness to operate, ahead of its time. And so peace is important for your inner life and outer life, wherever you are. The peace with the outer life is the effort of purpose. That's how you find peace. And the peace in the inner life is to just accept the simplest you. And when you find that universe, there's a freedom to move in any complexity. A species that loves itself is like the spirit of advancement and the foot fully on the gas pedal. It would be such an incredible force, just the mindset shift of 8 billion creatures on this rock. The advanced civilization, the early pioneers of it will be like master musicians just playing in tune, and the rest of the world hears it, Rishi Vyasa was known to be the teacher of teachers. I would say the teacher of teachers in the outer realms is the advanced civilization, is the future. And the teacher of teachers behind our eyes. That is the hilarious fact that consciousness originates, and that is its originality. It is its own origin. It is a proper word perhaps would be the self-effulgence, of the liberated glowing ones. Isaac Asimov, this incredible sci-fi writer and scientist, he says violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. That means violence occurs when the human being is not smart enough to solve the problem non-violently. And so the species needs that approach. It needs to focus on competence. It needs to focus, like pretty much the cultures of the world have to make true skill cool. I don't know how. I don't know how our world is going to embrace its own ability, but it has an ability. Every person who is alive, your DNA is like you're being part of an X-Men team. Called the human species. Every person has different capabilities. It's not like we have X-Men powers, but we have different perspectives. That is X-Men enough. That is like, a league of heroes enough, And so, I'll end the episode here. Thanks for listening. Much blessings and namaste. Right after this, there's going to be a Discord event, guys. Literally, I'm going to turn off the stream and go on Discord. And thanks for listening. I'll post the link. All right. Thank you for listening.